What if I told you that almost everything you do, your ambitions, relationships, even your deepest beliefs, are shaped by one hidden fear? It sounds extreme, but according to cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker, this unconscious fear drives more of our decisions than we realize. Becker argued that humans, unlike any other species, live with the constant awareness of their own mortality. But instead of collapsing under the weight of this knowledge, we develop psychological defenses, some obvious, others deeply hidden, to keep that fear at bay. This fear doesn't just appear in moments of crisis. It shapes our ambitions, our belief systems, even our relationships. It influences why we chase success, why we seek love, why we follow ideologies, and even why we distract ourselves with entertainment. But what happens when we start to recognize this hidden force? And how does it truly shape our lives? We don't think about death every day. But what if I told you that, even when we're not aware of it, the fear of death is shaping our behavior in profound ways? In the 1980s, psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pyszczynski developed terror management theory, or TMT, which suggests that our awareness of mortality creates deep psychological anxiety. To manage this fear, we cling to worldviews, identities, and behaviors that make us feel like we matter, like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And when people are subtly reminded of their mortality, their behavior changes in surprising ways. Psychologists have run experiments where they prime people to think about death, often by simply asking them to write about their own mortality. The results? People who are reminded of death tend to become more nationalistic and defensive of their country's values, express stronger religious beliefs, seek status, legacy, or recognition in their work. These reactions are our subconscious way of holding on to something permanent, something that makes us feel like we'll live on, even after we're gone. Becker called this an immortality project, our attempt to leave something behind that outlives us. Some build businesses, others create art, write books, or dedicate themselves to a cause. Even having children can be seen as an immortality project, a way to ensure that a part of us continues into the future. But is this really the answer to death anxiety? Or are we just distracting ourselves from the inevitable? We like to think we make choices based on logic, personal passion, or free will. But what if many of our biggest life decisions are actually shaped by something deeper, our fear of death? Why do people push themselves to succeed? Why do some obsess over wealth, fame, or influence? Part of it is survival, but another part is about something bigger, the desire to be remembered. From conquerors to inventors, many of history's most ambitious people were driven by the idea of leaving a lasting mark. They weren't just building careers, they were building legacies. Even today, many people bury themselves in work, not just for financial success, but because deep down, they want their name, their work, or their impact to outlive them. For many, love and relationships are about companionship, but on a deeper level, they're also about meaning. About feeling like our existence matters to someone else. The fear of being alone, of being forgotten, is closely tied to our fear of death. That's why relationships, romantic or otherwise, help soften existential anxiety. Having deep connections creates a sense of continuity. We may not live forever, but the bonds we form can make it feel like a part of us will. Almost every religion offers some form of comfort against death, whether it's an afterlife, reincarnation, or a connection to something eternal. But even non-religious people seek meaning. Whether through philosophy, creativity, or activism, many try to connect to something greater than themselves. Belief systems, whether spiritual or secular, act as psychological shields against death anxiety. They help us frame our existence as part of a larger, meaningful narrative. When people are reminded of their mortality, they don't just seek comfort in personal achievements or relationships. They also cling more strongly to their groups, whether political, religious, or national. Studies show that existential fear makes people more defensive of their country. more resistant to opposing views, and more willing to conform to their group's identity. This helps explain why political and cultural divides seem to deepen in times of crisis. When faced with uncertainty about life and death, people seek security in their groups, sometimes at the cost of open-mindedness. So if the fear of death influences so much of our lives, what can we do about it? Is there a way to face mortality without letting it control us? The fear of death doesn't just shape our ambitions, relationships, and beliefs. It also has a darker side. When left unchecked, it can drive people to destructive behaviors, from obsessive consumerism to dangerous extremism. Why do we buy things we don't need? Why do we chase the latest trends, luxury brands, or symbols of status? Part of the reason is that consumer culture thrives on distraction, especially from uncomfortable thoughts about mortality. Many brands tap into our subconscious fear of aging and death, selling us products that promise permanence, anti-aging creams, timeless fashion, or even luxury cars that make us feel significant. But no amount of consumption can erase existential anxiety. It only momentarily distracts us until the next purchase. For some, the fear of death doesn't just lead to ambition. It leads to an obsession with power. When people fear insignificance, they may go to extreme lengths to ensure their legacy is remembered. Some leaders become so consumed by the idea of their own mortality that they seek power at any cost, manipulating, controlling, and even destroying others in the process. History is full of figures who, consciously or unconsciously, let their fear of being forgotten drive them to catastrophic decisions. When people fear death, they often cling more tightly to their beliefs. But in some cases, this fear goes further. It becomes radicalism. Studies show that when people are reminded of death, they become more defensive of their worldviews. This explains why existential anxiety can drive ideological conflicts, from political polarization to religious extremism. The most dangerous movements in history often share a common thread: a promise of meaning, of significance beyond death. Whether through nationalism, religious fundamentalism, or ideological purity, radical groups offer something powerful: a way to escape mortality through devotion to a cause. When death anxiety goes unchecked, it doesn't just shape personal fears, it can tear societies apart. So, if the fear of death can lead to both greatness and destruction, what's the alternative? Can we face mortality without letting it control us? For most of human history, we've tried to escape the fear of death through achievements, beliefs, distractions. But what if the real answer isn't to run from it, but to face it? The first step to freedom is acceptance. Death isn't an error in the system, it's part of it. We suffer most when we resist this truth, pretending we'll live forever. Many ancient cultures understood this. They didn't treat death as a taboo, but as a teacher, a reminder to live fully. When we fear death, we often try to make our lives count by chasing external achievements, status, wealth, recognition. But these things never fully satisfy because they're built on the illusion of permanence. True meaning doesn't come from being remembered, it comes from how we live now, from the work we love, the people we care about, the moments we fully experience. The Stoics believed that to fear death is to fear nature itself. Seneca wrote that dying is simply returning the gift. We never truly owned life to begin with. Existentialist thinkers like Sartre and Camus argued that life has no inherent meaning, but that's not a tragedy. It's an opportunity. We get to choose our meaning, to define what matters to us. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment, including attachment to life itself. By embracing impermanence, we free ourselves from fear and become more present. When we stop fearing death, something beautiful happens. We start appreciating life. Every moment becomes more vivid, more valuable. Instead of being obsessed with what comes next, we actually live. The goal isn't to conquer the fear of death. It's to see it for what it is, a reminder to stop waiting, to stop hesitating, to live while we can. In the end, death isn't the enemy. It's the reason life matters at all. For centuries, humanity has struggled with the fear of death. Some let it control them, seeking power, wealth, or distractions to forget their mortality. Others learn to embrace it and, in doing so, truly live. Death anxiety can be paralyzing. It can make us afraid to take risks, afraid to love, afraid to truly experience life. But it doesn't have to be this way. When we stop running from death, we realize something profound. We were never meant to live forever. We were meant to live now. Ernest Becker once wrote, "The irony of man's condition is that the deepest need is to be free of the anxiety of death and annihilation. But it is life itself which awakens it, and so we must shrink from being fully alive." So ask yourself, what would you do differently if you weren't afraid of death? Would you take more risks? Would you love more deeply? Would you stop waiting and start truly living? Because in the end, the question isn't how long we live, but how deeply.